This is Sikkim 365 Radio. Text us at 254-339-1122. The Sikkim 365 Radio text line is sponsored by Riverbend Liquor and Wine, with the most extensive variety of craft beer in Waco. A hidden gem on Lakeshore Drive and 19th Street.
All right, he's the owner of the Baylor Bear Insider, and back when there was a transition between athletic directors Ian McCall and Mac Rhodes, he was up for that position as well. Jerry Hill writes and covers Baylor athletics and on with Sikkim 365 Radio. Jerry, thank you for being a part of the show. So you get a little bit more opportunities, I would think, more eyeballs on what's going on. But Craig made the comment yesterday about the quarterback competition, and really right now there doesn't seem to be any kind of whatever of who is one, two, or three. What do you see? Not that you can give us too much from the inside, but what do you see right now? Do you see any separation at all?
I would say probably not. I thought going in, and I still kind of hang on that I just think Gary winds up being the starter. He's a guy that's obviously been around. He's been here the longest. Man, David, I remember when he first came in and he just, he couldn't even throw a pass. And he's obviously gotten a lot better since then. He's known more as a runner, but, I think he's developed a lot better as a passer. And there's just kind of a calmness about him that certainly wasn't there, 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that's why I would kind of give him the edge going in. I'm not in the quarterback's room, so I couldn't tell you, exactly what they're thinking, but, I do think it's very close. I mean, watching yesterday, I remember Blake Shapen threw a nice deep ball, which you hadn't seen a lot of that, particularly last year or the last 2 years, really. So, he threw a nice ball, but Jacob Zeno's had his moments too. I mean, they all have. So, you just got it. I added her up, or I looked at their stats. So you've got two guys that have combined for 64 passes in their careers. So, and that's a good day. Or, I mean, Charlie Brewer might have thrown that in a game. So, that's the thing that you're looking at is whoever goes in there just doesn't have a ton of experience.
Jerry, one of the things we were talking about yesterday is it's equally as important outside of picking the quarterback for everything around whoever that is to get better. So that being said, could the early quarterback decision just be who is best to deal with whatever shortcomings they have around him, offensive line or the running game, and then maybe the guy who's going to be the long-term starter doesn't really happen until the offensive line gets in a rhythm and the offense starts to grow in a system?
Yeah, I think that's important, Paul, because, you don't want – I mean, it's kind of like, when you draft a rookie quarterback, and if you've got a really bad offensive line, you don't want to put that guy out there and risk that right off the bat. And I'm not saying they're going to throw somebody out there, that's, just as, kind of the dummy guy. But I do think there's some of that like, hey, if you know that you're going to have to run a little more, is Gary Bohannon that guy? If you're not comfortable in the pocket, can you, do you have confidence in Jacob Zeno? Now, we'll say, Paul, being out there, and Coach Aranda talked about this a little bit up in Dallas, but there's so much depth in the offensive line, and at first glance you go, okay, they got a lot of more bodies. But you playing the position, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but that depth helps just in terms of reps at practice. You're not having, if you're Connor Galvin and you've been here 4 or 5 years, you're not having to go, every rep. I think that helps him throughout the season. But then I think the other part that you get that is the reason why I think this offensive line is going to be better this year is you also have competition. I don't know the last time that they had really good competition for spots in the offensive line. It was kind of like, okay, we've got these 5 guys, and that's ultimately your goal is you want to have these 5 guys. But if those 5 guys know they're the guys, why do they need to get any better? So I think that competition is going to make this offensive line better.
So, Jerry, would it be fair to say that if you were predicting an offensive line right now, you could put in Connor Galvin and then you'd leave everything else blank, basically? Because that's kind of where they are right now, right? Connor Galvin's established himself as the left tackle, it appears, but outside of that, it's competition at every single position still.
I agree with that. And I, the other one I would pencil in somewhere, Craig, is Xavier Newman. Okay. Because, I mean, you've been in the media stuff. You see how everybody mentions him, and particularly Aranda, when he just brags on him being a leader, and it's more than that.
Yeah.
Here's one thing I'll credit Xavier for, because I would not want to line up against Apu. And in that one-on-one stuff, he's going against, and he gets his butt beat some, but he hangs in there and he fights. And I think that's kind of what Coach Aranda was talking about, is that his fighting and his leadership is beyond anything he's seen from Xavier. And I think that's what he's seeing in practice, is a guy that will stand in there with this 6'4", 350-pound, just absolute beast. And he's going to lose some. But, man, if he wins once out of 5 or 6, he's a heck of an offensive lineman. So I think that's helping him. And I would pencil him in. I think Jacob Gall has got to play somewhere as well. Mm-hmm. Khalil Keith is a guy that I think they have a lot of confidence in right now. But you're right. I think, for 3 or 4 spots, but again, that depth is where I think you've got 8 or 9 guys that are competing for those spots, because I know they like Casey Phillips a lot. Mascua, the big offensive lineman, inside guy that's going to play at one of the guards, Grant Miller. I mean, all of those guys can play. So again, whoever they wind up with, and I think you're going to see more rotation too. And again, in the offensive line, I think that's big. Yeah, you want your 5, but don't you want a second 5 that is at least ready, that can take some of those snaps off of those guys? So if you can have a situation where you can rotate guys in and not lose much, I just think that makes your offensive line way better.
Yeah, and Eric Mateos told me, this is back during the break, that he doesn't think it's a talent issue, that it is a commitment and being focused at times issue. And some of these guys have let their clock run out or almost run out, and maybe that's the last straw that, hey, and Mascua you hear as a possible pro prospect. That's a former Matt Rule guy, so that wouldn't surprise a commitment to Matt Rule as well. So the Xavier Newman, Dave Aranda said something to us a couple of days ago or so, that it wasn't that he was in a dark place, but that guys around him, Xavier trusts them, not talent-wise or whatever, but he now feels comfortable with this group, and that maybe he's opened up his mind, and that is allowing him to play better.
And he kind of mentioned that a little bit in the post media, maybe after the scrimmage the other day. So yeah, I think that's part of it, and even in letting the coaches in too, Smoak. I think that was important. Like, now he trusts these coaches too. He was around the other guys for 3 years. This is his second year with this group. But if you think about it, well, and like with Mateos and Grimes and stuff, this is his first year with them. But, if you think about it, he had, even last year, did he really have a year with those guys? So I think that's been important for Xavier, is to be able to get to that point where, like he said, he's trusting the other players, but I think he trusts these coaches too. And I think Mateos and Grimes, I mean, they're both kind of O-line coaches. I mean, Grimes has the tight ends, but that's an O-line coach, going back most of his career, and he certainly looks like an offensive lineman. So I think the fact that you have both of those guys in there, he trusts them, and I think he's going to play for him. Like I said, maybe he doesn't wind up at center. That's where I've seen him a lot. But I think he's either at center or one of the 2 guards. I think he's in one of those 3 inside positions for you opening day.
Jerry, do you think there'll be a big learning curve with this offense, or do you think that it's straightforward enough to where these guys can kind of naturally groove into it?
Paul, if they had a year like last year where you didn't have a spring and you were learning on Zoom and all that stuff, I think this would be a difficult offense to learn. But I think the fact that they have had that, off season, the spring, even the summer, I mean, those guys are out there working, on their own and stuff a lot in the summer, and then, now into fall camp. I think they've got a good enough handle on it, and certainly through the spring. maybe understand the wide zone as much as they do, but they seem to have a good grasp of it. And like I said, I think it was huge having that spring, having the off season and all that to be able to learn it. But yeah, if you had to throw this stuff out there with what they went through last year, I don't know how they would get it.
So, Jerry, a couple media sessions ago, the players were asked if they'd been, hearing or talking about realignment much, and it seems to be like a non-issue. And as I pointed out on the show, like R.J. Sneed, what does he care? He's not going to be here, past next year anyways. But for you, you've seen this happen before. You've seen the Big 12 and all their dealings. Just what have been your thoughts from the outside looking in on OU and Texas' departure and obviously now a very unsettled future for the remaining 8 Big 12 schools?
Yeah, and I will say, kind of like what you were saying, Craig, that with the players, I don't know that it really does matter right now. I mean, there may be some that, they're so used to playing Texas and Oklahoma, and that's all they've known. They're probably mad about it a little bit, but, as far as their immediate future, they don't care. I mean, they know who they're playing this year, and that's all that really matters to them. And maybe for the freshmen that just came in, or even, the recruits that are, either committed or, will sign in December, certainly that's a factor. But I don't think for these guys it really does matter. Now, in terms of what I think is going to happen, and I've talked at a couple of the service clubs, Craig, and I say I wish I knew, and one of the things that Max said, and I think it was with you guys, like who knows what it's going to look like in 25? I mean, that's 4 years down the road. Now, do I think Texas and Oklahoma will still be here in 24? I don't, but you hope that happens. That you hope that Texas and OU are here through that 24 season, and that you don't really have any kind of immediate need to just jump. But I think there's possibilities out there. I would ideally, I'd like to keep the Big 12 and maybe add some teams, but who do you add that really gives? You're not going to add a Texas or Oklahoma. We know that, but can you add somebody that really kind of gives you some oomph, that really makes a difference? Don't just add teams to add teams. Add some teams that are really going to make a difference and kind of give you, again, you're not adding a brand name like Texas or Oklahoma. Right. But you can add some teams that will give you a little. Oh, hey, they joined them. They Big 12 must be viable if these guys joined them. So hopefully that happens. If not, and Baylor needs a landing place. I think with what they've done over these last how many ever years. I mean, if you even going back to the last decade, but particularly recently with the men's basketball winning national championship, women's basketball 2 years ago. Football being in the Sugar Bowl 2 years ago, and then the facilities. You look at everything. Baylor's in a good place. You just got to get a good landing spot if it's not in the Big 12.
Jerry, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Jerry Hill, Baylor Bear Insider, at View from Hill on Twitter. May see him a little bit later on today with media session. Thanks, Jerry.
I have to say, we just had a whole media session with Jerry. Did not bring up the NCAA investigation. Me and Grayson did a whole podcast, got to the very end of it until realizing we hadn't brought up the NCAA investigation. It's just wild to me how much that mattered for how long it mattered and how much it hasn't mattered since that announcement was made. It's like it never even happened. Am I the only one that feels that way?
No, it is.
It's like nobody even cares now. Like nobody, it's like
there's two
all
things.
that talk about all of it in the build-up, and then like it happens and just nobody's even talking about it. It's like, whatever. And I suppose it's like, yeah, you probably don't want to talk about it because you were talking about it for the last 5 years. But still, it's odd to me in a good way. It's still just very odd.
It'll be the same way when the Big 12 returns that money to Baylor sometime this fall, because it seems like that's been on the table, and that's a timeline. It's a calendar. It's not going to come until a certain day. It never was, no matter anything in between. And we try to explain that along the way. Thanks to a lot of you again on the chat, text line, phone calls, 254-339. 1122, and some of you asking questions about Baylor at wide receiver. We have one more segment in this hour. It's going to be about Texas A&M. We'll take a break here in about 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, outside of starting quarterback in the O-line, they're good. I mean, so take that as far as you want to take it. They don't know who the starting quarterback is, and there's like 3 or 4 spots in the O-line that are unsettled at this moment. But outside of that, they're really loaded. I mean, they're pretty good everywhere else, but yeah,
They have a ton of talent on defense and a defensive-minded head coach and a good defensive coordinator and a defensive staff, but they are uncertain on offense.
But if
this has been building for much longer than just the last 2 years. It's been about 2016 that this kind of tidal wave was coming.
Yeah, and so those are obviously glaring issues that could cause you to, add 3 or 4 wins or deduct 3 or 4 wins. But, everywhere else, they are pretty good. So we'll see. They're definitely going to have to use defense to win some games this year, it sounds like, once again.
Someone is listening from Noster, Missouri. Bob Williams. Thank you. Ashland, Oregon. Dallas. From Kentucky, West Virginia fan. From Ashland, Oregon is Louisiana, among many others. Appreciate it. This is Sikkim 365 Radio. Ideal MRI.